Good evening, everybody. My name is Amy Hofkemeyer. I am the Director of Setting and Compliance for the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council. Tonight, we have an informational meeting to discuss our transmission programmatic environmental impact statement that is currently out for public comment. We have a presentation for you, and then we will be present to answer questions. We ask that people not submit public comment tonight. The online database is open to submit comments, or you can email comments to our inbox at comments@efsec.wa.gov, or there will be two additional public comment hearings on April 22nd and April 24th, where we will be taking public comment. So that being said, I will hand it over to Sean Green for our presentation.
Thank you, Amy. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So hello and welcome to both those of you who are here now and those watching this recording later. This public informational meeting is being held by the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, or EFSEC, for our recent draft Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, for high voltage transmission facilities. My name is Sean Green, and I am an environmental planner for EFSEC. First, a little bit of history on the EFSEC agency. EFSEC was created in 1970 for the siting of thermal power plants. The intent was to create a one-stop permitting agency for large energy facilities. But a number of facility types are required to apply for siting certification through EFSEC, including nuclear facilities and many high voltage transmission lines. Beyond those facility types that are required to site through EFSEC, many other types can choose to use the EFSEC process. EFSEC's council is comprised of state and local government members who review each application before voting to make a formal recommendation to the governor. If recommending approval, the package to the governor includes a draft site certification agreement, or SCA, which defines all pre-construction, construction, and operations plans. The governor makes the final decision on whether to approve or deny any projects in the EFSEC process. As for this programmatic EIS, following the passage of Senate Bill 5165 in 2023, the Washington Administrative Code, or WAC, was amended to direct EFSEC to prepare a non-project environmental review of electrical transmission facilities with a nominal voltage of 230 kilovolts or greater, including all substations and other related equipment. Transmission facilities fitting this definition are those that are typically considered high voltage that connect energy facilities to distribution points, whereas low voltage lines, such as those that connect directly to residences, are not included. For brevity, I will just use the word transmission throughout this presentation to discuss that subset of transmission facilities covered by the programmatic EIS. A programmatic EIS is a type of non-project environmental review used for planning under the State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA. It is important to note that a programmatic EIS is not directly associated with any individual project and does not replace the requirement that each project receive a project-specific environmental review. One novel aspect of this particular programmatic EIS is a stipulation located within WAC 43.21C.408 that states that any subsequent transmission projects would be considered to have mitigated for any significant adverse environmental impacts considered within the programmatic EIS, so long as they adhere to the recommendations included within the programmatic EIS. What this means, in essence, is that if a proponent follows all the recommendations within the programmatic EIS, the project-specific SEPA lead agency could not determine that any environmental impacts identified in this document rise to the level of significance as defined by SEPA. This does not preclude the SEPA lead agency from identifying other significant impacts or developing additional mitigation. It also does not functionally require that an applicant or SEPA lead agency adopt all mitigation measures from this document in order to fully mitigate an otherwise significant impact. That determination will still reside with the project-specific SEPA lead agency. The goal of this programmatic EIS is to identify probable significant adverse environmental impacts common to all transmission projects, develop mitigation strategies for those impacts, which may include avoidance of sensitive areas, and provide that information to project-level SEPA lead agencies, permitting agencies, tribes, developers, and other interested parties. In an ideal scenario, this will have the effect of helping developers identify methods of avoiding and minimizing significant impacts at the earliest phases of planning, so as to avoid expensive and time-intensive redesigns later in the process. SEPA lead agencies and permitting agencies would be provided with a well-referenced and researched list of likely environmental impacts and effective mitigation measures that they can use in their reviews of proposed projects, resulting in a more comprehensive but quicker review process. Knowing that this programmatic EAS is not tied to any specific project and no facilities will be built or not built as a result of this document, you can be forgiven for wondering why this affects you. Well, we anticipate increased and increasing demand for transmission facilities in the near future. Recent estimates show a 20% increase in electricity demand within the region over the next 10 years. To put that in perspective, that is more than 4 times greater than the increase in demand over the previous 10 years. To meet this demand, the most important growth sector in energy generation is renewable energy, especially wind and solar. One of the hurdles of this type of energy production is the fact that the most productive areas for their generation tend to be in low populous rural areas. As you may expect, the bulk of electricity demand comes from more populous, typically urban areas. Connecting these generation facilities with distribution points requires a much expanded transmission infrastructure. This general increase in demand over time, similarly, will require new and expanded transmission facilities. Beyond the likelihood that you will see more transmission projects in the future, transmission facilities can also have unique and significant environmental impacts due to their nature as linear facilities that can stretch over 100 miles each. This is your opportunity to help us make sure that all significant environmental impacts common to these types of facilities are appropriately considered and mitigated. The most effective and influential time to make changes to a project is when it is still in the planning phase, or in this case, even before the planning phase. This is an opportunity to provide guidance to developers and regulatory agencies before a single hole is dug. As an added benefit, SEPA lead agencies reviewing new transmission facilities will be required by law to consider this programmatic EAS during regulatory review. So there's no risk of this document falling by the wayside and being forgotten about. There are quite a few technical terms present throughout the programmatic EAS, which are all defined in detail in Chapter 7, the glossary. But there are 2 terms I want to present you with that are standard to all environmental impact statements and are important in understanding to effectively read the programmatic EAS. The first term is mitigation measure, which can be defined as a specific step or action taken to address the impacts of a project development or action. Mitigation under SEPA typically follows a descending hierarchy of preference and effectiveness, with the most preferred being avoidance, then minimization, then restoration, then reduction, then compensation, and finally monitoring and correction. You can see these defined in a little more detail at WAC 197-11-768. An example of a mitigation measure from this programmatic EIS is Historic and Cultural 6, which reads, following a cultural resources survey or desktop search, develop and follow an archaeological monitoring and discovery plan. As you can probably tell, this measure is designed to address potential project impacts to archaeological resources and incorporates avoidance, reduction, and monitoring mitigation. The second term is cumulative effects. These are the potential compounding and incremental impacts of a specific project when combined with other past, present, or reasonably foreseeable future developments. SEPA requires a cumulative effects analysis for any environmental impact statement, and they have been included here. Given the wide geographic scope and lack of a specific project to review, the cumulative impacts analysis present in this document is not as specific as one that you might see in a project level EIS. But we have made a determined effort to analyze how the compounding effects of multiple transmission projects over time, when combined with other developments, may impact resources of concern. An example within this programmatic EAS is transportation, where we noted that these projects may result in a measurable consequence on supply chains or the management and distribution of peoples and materials, or may result in prolonged road closures or detours that cause major inconvenience to commuters. So we can now move on to the structure of the programmatic EIS itself. RCW 43.21C.405 dictates that this programmatic EIS must include, quote, geographic areas that are suitable for the electrical transmission facilities with a nominal voltage of 230 kilovolts or greater. Given this fairly broad geographic scope, EFSEC elected to include all of the state of Washington within the study area for this programmatic EIS. The only areas that were excluded were marine areas and islands without bridge connections, as those would require undersea or oceanic lines that extend beyond the technical scope of this programmatic EIS. We also excluded tribal lands, as these are sovereign territories that often have their own regulatory processes and environmental review requirements. We provided each tribe with the option to include their lands within this programmatic EIS, but to date, no tribe has made that request. There were considerations for excluding other areas, such as removing islands with bridge connections or national parks, but all of these locations do have the legal and geographic capability of having transmission lines sited there, however unlikely. The programmatic EIS assessed impacts to a number of resources. The list on the left represents the environmental resources typical to all SEPA reviews that were therefore included in this programmatic EIS. The list on the right includes specific resources that were required to be included in the originating legislation for this programmatic EIS. Those were included within the document as well as a more robust socioeconomic review, which is specifically required for EFSEC reviews. And I won't go through the full list of impacts identified and analyzed within the programmatic EIS. The document is about 1,000 pages long, and the bulk of that is related to those impacts. With that said, I can show a representative sample of some of the types of impacts that we have addressed within the programmatic EIS. This includes water resources, where we consider changes in sedimentation, changes in water chemistry, increased water usage, altered hydrology, temporary water diversions, and groundwater extraction. Cultural and historic resources, where we assessed physical and visual impacts to historic and cultural resources, as well as to traditional cultural properties and tribal resources. And habitat, fish, and wildlife, where we included direct and indirect habitat loss, mortality of species, barriers to movement, and habitat fragmentation. For each of these impacts, as well as the many others that are included in other resource areas, we assessed the likelihood and magnitude of the impacts from transmission projects, both from overhead and underground lines. For each impact, we consulted with relevant subject matter experts and arrived at a determination on the degree of the potential impact. We categorize these impact determinations with a 5-step scale that goes from nil to negligible to low to moderate to high. For moderate and high rated impacts, we assess those as potentially significant absent mitigation. Under SEPA, environmental assessments weigh the likelihood of occurrence and severity of an impact. Significant impacts under SEPA are those that have a reasonable likelihood of more than a moderate adverse impact on environmental quality, or those that would have a severe adverse impact, even if the likelihood is low. Significant impacts are additionally important within the specific context of this programmatic EIS because, as I noted before, any applicant who follows all of the recommendations of this programmatic EIS relevant to any identified significant impact is deemed to have completed their mitigation for that impact. Because of that unique caveat that I've mentioned, where any applicant following the recommendations is deemed to have completed their mitigation, we have crafted a few technical terms that have definitions specific to this EIS and are therefore unlikely to be familiar to you, regardless of your level of expertise with environmental impact statements. The first term is what we call general conditions. These are conditions that are clearly identified as a baseline for being able to use the analysis in the programmatic EIS. An example would be General 2, which states in part that projects will adhere to relevant federal, state, and local laws and regulations. If a project cannot comply with a relevant law or regulation, then an explanation would be provided to the SEPA lead agency. If a project does not meet all general conditions identified within the programmatic EIS, then both the applicant and the CP lead agency may still make use of this document for impact identification and analysis and mitigation sourcing, but the project would not be following the recommendations within this programmatic EIS, and it would therefore be up to the project specific CP lead agency to determine when significant impacts have been fully mitigated. The second term is design considerations, which are simply guidance documents, manuals, and/or best management practices produced by agencies or organizations. EFSEC has listed a number of these considerations to be incorporated in project planning and design within the programmatic EIS. One example listed here is the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Written Management Guidelines and Recommendations. Similar to general conditions, if applicants are not able to meet the design considerations outlined within the programmatic EIS, then the determination of when significant impacts are fully mitigated would rest with the project-specific CP lead agency. The final term that I want to specifically address is avoidance criteria. These are criteria that limit the scope of the environmental review and provide a consistent baseline for evaluating the potential impacts of project applications. These criteria became especially important as we assessed impacts to resources that are notably difficult to mitigate, such as the example here. Avoid 23 states that projects will avoid constructing facilities that will physically impact tribal resources and traditional cultural places. When considering a resource such as traditional cultural places at a statewide context, as this programmatic EAS does, avoidance was seen as the only type of mitigation that could be determined to mitigate for potentially significant impacts in all cases, under all circumstances, which was a task that this programmatic EAS was required to do. It is possible that project level review by a CP lead agency would be able to identify sufficient mitigation to address significant concerns to those resources specific to that project, but at a programmatic level, these avoidance criteria are considered as part of the recommendations for this document. All of these conditions, considerations, and criteria can be found alongside the other mitigation measures that we've developed in Appendix 3.1-1 of the Programmatic EIS. And don't worry about reading the text on this slide, but this is an image of the decision tree, or at least the part of the tree that would fit on the slide, that we developed for the Programmatic EIS that is included in full in the first chapter. We are aware that this Programmatic EIS is a large and complex document, and tools like this decision tree represent our best efforts to make it as easy as possible to use. This tree takes both applicant developers and CP lead agencies through a series of steps with yes or no responses that will ideally guide them through how we envision this programmatic EIS being used. This tree would also hopefully avoid differences of interpretation between developers and CP lead agencies that might detract from the efficient application of recommendations from this document. The final structural aspect of the programmatic EIS that I want to take you through is our development of impact magnitude mapping through the use of the goal set program. This program allows for a 5-step process where geographic-based data from a variety of sources is incorporated into a single system. Resources are identified through the data and assigned conflict indicator values, and then the various resources with their conflict indicator values are combined into a single suitability map. These represent the first 3 steps of the goal set program. The final 2 steps require a start point and an end point, after which the program will draw several corridor options based on pathways that result in least conflict corridors for any or all resources. As this programmatic EIS is not based on a specific project, the suitability maps included within represent the maximum extent of the goal set program that we were able to develop. Our hope is that these maps allow future applicants to complete the final 2 steps of the program based on their known points of interconnection with existing infrastructure and be presented almost instantly with several route options that avoid the most sensitive resources. And what I'm showing here now is one of the suitability maps that produced for and included within the programmatic EIS. This particular map shows resource conflicts specific to wildlife from overhead transmission lines, with purple being the highest conflict and white and yellow being the lowest conflict. This map includes a wide variety of data sources, from wildlife observations to habitat identification to movement corridors and more, to combine to show areas of the state where wildlife would be more or less resilient to impacts from transmission. As I mentioned before, most of the resources within the programmatic EIS have a suitability map, and some, such as wildlife, have multiple if necessary to address different facility types, such as overhead or underground, or resource types, such as wildlife or fish. And just because we're rather proud of these maps and the visuals help break up how much text is in this presentation, here's the suitability map for recreation. As you can see, areas like national parks have been identified as areas of highest anticipated conflict between transmission projects and recreation resources, with national forests, state and city parks, and various individual recreation facilities also included at a lower degree of anticipated conflict. And that more or less wraps up my discussion of the programmatic EIS as a document, but there are several important dates relevant to the programmatic EIS between now and final publication. First, as Amy mentioned at the start of this, there is an active public comment period following the publication of the draft EIS on March 30th or 30, or 31st. This comment period will run for 30 days and end at 5:00 p.m. on April 30th. We do not anticipate extending this public comment period past April 30th. During this period, EFSEC will hold 2 public comment hearings virtually on April 22nd and April 24th from 5 to 8 p.m. These are opportunities for members of the public to provide verbal comments. For more information on how to attend and participate in these meetings, please visit the EFSEC webpage and navigate to the page for the Transmission Programmatic EIS, or use the link shown here. After this comment period closes, EFSEC will begin work on assessing the comments received, responding to those comments, making any necessary changes to the programmatic EIS, including those that result from substantive comments received, and producing the final programmatic EIS. EFSEC expects to publish the final programmatic EIS by June 30th, 2025. So now that you're aware of the public comment period, your first question is probably, how do I get the programmatic EIS in order to review it? The quickest and easiest way to get access to the programmatic EIS is to visit EFSEC's dedicated page for it on the EFSEC website. The link is shown here. The document, all appendices, and many related documents are readily available there. If reliable internet access is an issue, or you prefer to have a personal copy for whatever reason, you can contact EFSEC by phone, mail, or email. I'll have our contact information on the next page, and request a physically printed copy or a digital copy on a thumb drive, though you will be charged the cost of production and distribution. We will also have a free physical copy at the EFSEC main office in Olympia, but it would need to stay on property while you look through. I'll also have EFSEC's office address on the next slide. For a cost-free version outside of the website that might be more local to you, we have distributed the programmatic EIS to 25 libraries across the state. The list to the right of this page shows all of them, so feel free to look through and find the most convenient one for you personally. Depending on their stated preference, each library will either have a physical or digital copy on a thumb drive available for checkout. When you are reviewing the programmatic EIS and preparing comments to submit to EFSEC, we do have some guidance to suggest in terms of the type of comment, though we'll leave the content of the comments up to you. When responding to environmental impact statements in general, the goal is to provide substantive comments. These are comments that go to the core of the document, either by recommending that additional environmental impacts be included, that changes be made to the determinations of severity that EFSEC has applied to the identified impacts, comments on the types and effectiveness of mitigation being proposed, or other errors or omissions. These comments are particularly impactful when they provide us with the why. If you are to submit a comment stating that, for example, you disagree with how we rated impacts to groundwater, you are more likely to see a change in the final version if you include your rationale. Substantive comments will be considered by EFSEC during edits to the programmatic EIS and be incorporated or addressed in the final version. Non-substantive comments will generally not be addressed in the final version. These are comments such as general statements in support of or opposed to the development or use of the programmatic EIS, opinions on types of energy production, opinions on EFSEC, or other comments that are unrelated to transmission or the programmatic EIS. Candidly, in previous environmental impact statements, the majority of comments that we have received were not substantive. This is not ideal because it results in members of the public spending their time and energy reviewing one of our documents, but not providing us with comments that contribute to improving the final version. To be clear, EFSEC will accept and catalog all comments, substantive or otherwise. The purpose of this slide is to provide you with some guidance on what type of comment we would find most useful. EFSEC genuinely values outside perspectives on the programmatic EIS, and we're eager to see the comments that you will be providing to help us develop and improve the final product. EFSEC has made a concerted effort to provide multiple avenues for public input. Apart from the 2 scheduled public comment hearings later this month, EFSEC can receive comments through our online comment database at comments.efsec.wa.gov, which is our preferred method, through email at comments@efsec.wa.gov, by physical mail at our P.O. Box, by phone at 360-664-1345, or in person at our main office in Olympia. As a note, if you would like to meet somebody or see the programmatic EIS in person at EFSEC's office, we would request that you contact us by phone or email beforehand so that we can have things prepared for you. And as a reminder, EFSEC will be taking comments through April 30th. After that point, we will be focused on responding to comments and editing the programmatic EIS to meet our June 30th publication date. With that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. Again, we don't plan on taking public comments at this meeting, but we're more than willing to answer any questions that you have. And we're here to help you prepare to review and comment on the programmatic EIS by April 30th. Thank you.
If you'd like to ask a question of staff, please either use the Teams function to raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes, Travis Dutton.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering if you could either answer one question or tell me where I can go figure it out for myself if I was supposed to have done that. But could you expand a little bit more on those gold set cards? I'm not sure I caught what the intent of those or what that section included. And again,
Sure.
I can go do my own homework if you want to just send me where that is and not waste folks' time here.
No, I think it's a valid topic to discuss here. I think one of the most interesting products of the programmatic EIS. So these gold set cards are a way in which we have incorporated data from a variety of sources and kind of assigned conflict values to them based on subject matter expertise, and essentially overlaying them across the state. And the purpose is to provide this to as sort of a planning resource for future applicants of transmission projects, so that they are able to identify areas where we anticipate there will be the most level of conflict for each of the resources areas considered within programmatic EIS. And like I mentioned, the goal set program has the option for inputting a start point and an end point of a linear facility like a transmission line, and it will automatically draw a route that avoids the highest levels of conflict. So it's essentially a least conflict corridor. Obviously, with the programmatic, we can't do that because we don't have start points and end points, but our hope is that future applicants will take advantage of that ability, and it will both reduce impacts in the long run and reduce review times and resources spent by applicants and CP lead agencies.
Thank you. And did I miss on here, this is suitability related to a specific criteria or just all criteria? I know you had a couple of these cards, so I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah, so the one you're looking at right now is specific to wildlife impacts from overhead transmission lines. There is also a card for wildlife from underground transmission lines and fish from overhead and underground. Most of the resources covered within the programmatic have one of these suitability maps included within the programmatic EAS. They're typically found at the end of each resource section. And there is more explanation about how we anticipate them being used and what sort of data is being incorporated when each of those is shown within the programmatic EAS. But yeah, like I said, the map looks very different for each resource based on what sort of data we're incorporating and also just where those areas of high conflict are located for that resource. For recreation, like this one here, the highest levels of conflict are really national parks. So you see like North Cascades, Mount Rainier, and Olympic National Park as really the purple areas. And yeah, so there are some resources that don't have them just because there wasn't really a way to map resources specific to that. I can't think of one of the resources. There were, I think, 3 or 4 that did not have them. I can't think of one of them off the top of my head, but most of the resources have.
Air quality, I think, was one.
Yeah, you're right. Air quality was one just because there's not really like a compounding impact from the point source, or not even the point source, but the vehicle use associated with the construction of transmission facilities that could really be mapped out at a statewide level.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Sure. And I probably should have said this somewhere in the presentation, but if you're reading through this and you have questions, feel free to either email or contact EFSEC through any of the methods that I've shown before, or email me directly. My email is just Sean, SEAN Green, like my last name, at efsec.wa.gov. I think that's my email, right?
I'd encourage anybody else who has questions to please speak up. But if we don't have anything for another moment, then I think we will conclude. So if you have questions, please speak up. That was a good time for them.
I have a quick question. Thank you. Would you mind going back to the slide on the cumulative impacts analysis? Sorry to make you, okay, great. Are you all, so I guess for your assessment of reasonably foreseeable actions, are you all relying on a specific data set to kind of get a better understanding of the transmission build out for the next however many years? And if so, can you share what resources you're using?
Yeah, so we've incorporated a couple of data sets. One is some of the anticipated corridors identified by the Transmission Corridor Working Group that EFSEC was a part of a few years ago. We've also incorporated some of the anticipated future developments identified within several programmatic EISs that Ecology is working on right now for solar, wind, and green hydrogen, with our understanding that the areas where they anticipate those facilities being developed would be likely starting points for future transmission facilities, with the endpoints being, again, mostly those densely populated urban areas. But we're really limited with how detailed and effective our cumulative impacts analysis can really get, since we are assessing this at a statewide level. And we have been very clear throughout the document that project levels CEPA lead agencies should absolutely still perform a cumulative impacts analysis for their projects, and nothing said in here within this programmatic EIS like excludes them from or precludes them from doing so. That's really the only effective way to assess cumulative impacts at a project level is doing a project specific cumulative impacts analysis.
Got it. That makes sense. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. You just faking
Did
me
I see
out?
somebody's hand go up?
I believe it was Alton A again.
Did you have further questions?
No, sorry, that was unintentional.
Okay. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask of our team before we conclude? Okay, well, not hearing anything. Thank you everybody for your attendance this evening. This recording will be posted, so if you would like to rewatch this presentation, you can find it once we get the recording set up on our project website. And as Sean mentioned, if there's any questions that you think of later or anything that you'd like further clarity on, please feel free to reach out to our office. And we look forward to hearing from everybody on their thoughts on the programmatic EIS. So thank you everybody for your time this evening.
Thank you all.